Testing in English. Testing English booth. You got it? Thumbs up. Awesome.
Todavía no.
Probando.
1, 2, 3.
recuerda avisar a los captioners que bueno, yo les avisé, pero recordarles que ya abrimos para que puedan entrar y eso.
No te preocupes, ahí les...
Espérate, que no te estoy escuchando. Dame un segundo. Dime.
Que no te preocupes, ahí les escribo en el grupo.
Ah, ok. Thank you.
English, English. English, English. English, English. English, English. English, English. English, English. Testing. English, English. English, English.
Está realmente ganando la batalla contra las maras. La gente lo banca. Hay violaciones a los derechos humanos.
Estos son los primeros 2.000 supuestos pandilleros trasladados al centro de confinamiento.
Distraída, arranquemos desde el principio. El Salvador, al igual que otros países de la región, tiene lo que se conoce.
Good afternoon, everyone.
I am officially now ringing the bell for the start. Yes. Good afternoon to everyone here present. I now open the 14th hearing of the 186th regular session of the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights. And the hearing is entitled Advances and Challenges in the Forensic Search in Mexico, which was requested by the esteemed state of Mexico. My name is Margaret May Macaulay. I am presently the president of the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights. And this afternoon, I have here with me the first vice president and the country rapporteur for Mexico, Commissioner Esmeralda Arasamina de Chortino, and also the immediate past president of the commission, Commissioner Julissa Mantilla, who is the rapporteur for Memory, Truth, and Justice. I also have with me Commissioner Carlos Bernal and Vice Executive Secretary for Petitions and Cases, Monsieur, I forgot my language, Senor Jorge Mesa. And to my right, the Executive Secretary, Tanya Remuno. Well, I also wish to give sincere and cordial greetings to the state, civil society representatives, and Senor Fernandez Maldonado, representative of the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, the UN High Commissioner of Human Rights. Let me announce the allotment of time for proceedings. The state will start as they requested this hearing, and for the state, you are assigned 17 minutes. And civil society, you're also assigned 17 minutes. And the United Nations expert, you are assigned 5 minutes. And the commission, 17 minutes. Then after the commission finishes their questions and comments, the state will have 8 more minutes, and the civil society will have 8 more minutes. And then I will close the session, hopefully in 3 minutes. With that, I welcome you and ask the state to make its representations as the requester. Oh, Ambassador Baños at the top there. Yes, good afternoon, Ambassador Baños, Your Excellency, and all your delegation with you. Thank you for being present. I don't know. I see an office. No, that's not him. There are no names. I don't see any names. But it's somebody from the state of Mexico, yes?
Yes, they are in Mexico. There's not.
Yeah. I really can't see any faces.
That is la Procuraduría.
But she's not being shown. She's not being shown. Is her camera on?
Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. I'm connected.
Can you put on your camera?
¿Nos escucha?
Can you hear me?
She can see us.
Can you see us? She's not even hearing us, I don't think.
She has another link. Now she can.
Muchas gracias. Disculpe.
Thank you very much. We're sorry. I was not given access as a panelist, and now I have the access. Thank you very much. I greet the Commissioner, Margaret Macaulay, who past Monday was elected as president of the IACHD, as well as Commissioner Esmeralda Rosmedera de Cuntillo, first vice president of the IHCHR and Mexico rapporteur. I would like to congratulate you on being elected, and I'm so pleased to see that the directive board is now run by women. The first time that this happens in the history of the Commission. I would like to welcome everybody who's here with us today at this hearing. This hearing has been at the request of the Mexican state with the purpose of informing on progress, challenges in terms of forensic search in Mexico. I give the word now to Carla Quintera, who's the National Commissioner for the search of missing people in Mexico, so she may start this session on behalf of the Mexican authorities. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ambassador. This presentation will be divided in two sections. First of all, the prosecutor's office, and then with the rest of the authorities who are here present today. I give the floor now to the prosecutor, Fiscal Irene Diaz. Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. The SENAPI head, Cepeda, will start, and then Patricia Torres. Patricia Cepeda, go ahead. You are connected now. Good afternoon to everybody. I greet the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, all of the representatives of civil society, and all of the families who are here at this hearing. The Attorney General of the Republic is sending his greetings. He is working on creating the forensic data bank, which is already operational, and is complying with all of the requirements by law. The prosecutor's office wants to strengthen forensic search capabilities. The challenge that we have is to have a standardized model that has interconnectivity. Our forensic investigative agency has already created the implementation plan for the short, medium, and long term in order to comply with all of the objectives that have been set out in said plan. There are 4 stages of development, starting the plan, implementation, the databases for criminal justice and for different agencies, working with the authorities, and the smooth consolidation of all of these stages. All of these stages will be put into motion and will gradually be implemented and will be activated so that they may work together and start implementing new resources to the national data bank. I would like to also state that this database is already working with the information that the prosecutor's office has, with search engines and with capabilities for investigation and for data gathering. The second stage will be the integration of all of the databases for the federal agencies and prosecutor's office. 28 of the states have already been visited for that, where we have identified all of the needs, the diagnosis that need to be worked on in order to have an integrated forensic database. This will be done so that they can start being a part of the national database. On the third stage, we will strengthen the capabilities of this database to include information that is outside of the prosecutor's work. Other information, other data, we're already working with the National Commission for the Search of Disappeared People to work in real time on these databases, it means a huge challenge. We have to take into account that not every agency has the same way of recording its information, and not all of them have the same technological capabilities or even a smooth way of connecting. Therefore, the prosecutor's office is going to work on the technology and on the methodology with each of these agencies so that they may start being a part of this wider project. Incorporating all of this information into a national database will allow us to have structured data that works under the same standards and that helps us to do searches post-mortem, all of the information about the death and about the remains. So this database also is not just a temporary project, and it's not a finite project, and it will not have a specific date of conclusion. To the contrary, it will be a constant review, a constant improvement, and it will adapt to all of the needs for which it has been created. Once the second stage is concluded and we're able to incorporate all of the information from the 32 states of the country, then we will consider that we are starting to be able to work with this tool and that it will have the indispensable capabilities in order to overcome all of the obstacles that we deal with currently in terms of forensic remains. I thank you once again for listening to me, and this concludes my presentation. Thank you very much, Mrs. Cepeda. One of the elements of the National Database of Forensic Data is that we're going to have a database that is for pre-mortem and post-mortem. This will allow us to gather information from the family members of the disappeared, and for the family members looking for people who still may be unidentified. This database will be fed information from different prosecutors' office in the different states, as well as the Attorney General's office. And other institutions and agencies will participate as well, like the Forensic Institute from Jalisco. In all of this information, not only public officers will work, but also the families will be able to contribute. The families of the disappeared, they will be able to send in their own information. This database started being created in the year 2017. And to date, the 32 federal states that are participating are already consolidated in a centralized database. That is where the information is stored in a systemized fashion, in a unified fashion, and each state is working with the same type of registration and technology. So far, there are already 15,000 records of disappeared persons and more than 10,000 records of deceased persons that are still unidentified. It also includes almost 8,000 areas of recovery where people have been located, unidentified, deceased. And this will allow us to know as well if we're also working on unmarked graves. It will help us improve our work in that area. And once again, I would like to repeat that we're working with the Attorney General's office. It is thanks to them that we have a registry of about 1,600 unmarked graves and have recovered 1,200 bodies from there. Working with the states, working as a national entity, we have also been able to identify an average of 25 previously unidentified deceased before through this database. And to date, we have total records of 3,352 people, which we have now managed to identify. Thank you very much. I'll continue with my presentation, if you would help me. Here we have our presentation. Very well. Good afternoon to everybody. On behalf of the 5 entities that are here present from the National Center of Identification of Disappeared People, the Jalisco Center for Identification, the Forensic Identification Special Mechanism, and we're here before you today as a body of specialists on the identification of disappeared persons. So where did we start from? Well, there was a forensic crisis, at least 52,000 bodies unidentified with no official registry. Also, thousands of fragments of human bone that were also not identified. There was a lack of a coherent infrastructure, a coherent system to identify remains, a lack of resources, a lack of coordination, both on a national and a regional level, and just isolated attempts to fight this crisis, this forensic crisis, and a lack of methodology, especially when focused on mass disappearances, mass graves. We have seen this also happen in other areas of the world. When dealing with this crisis, we took some important steps, first steps as civil society, talking to experts, and then there was a law that was passed with the help of the families. And federal entities also gave the funds necessary to work with prosecutors. And as from 2019, there were grants from the National Committee for the Search of Disappeared Persons. And the state also committed to creating the special mechanism for forensic identification here present. Now, centers for identification have been created on a local, a state, and national level. This is a focus on massive problems. We need to understand nationally that this is a state matter, the identification of disappeared remains. We need to have a better system to identify these remains and to work better on forensic information, protect sensitive data, and have some agencies that are specialists in finding disappeared persons. We understand that we have to respond both in the short term, the middle term, and the long term, working with government entities with the correct methodology. And we need the help of the families as well. So what has been done to date? These institutions or these agencies have already been created, as I have just indicated, and we have resources from the national government, from certain states, and also we've been helped by international entities. We have experts in forensic identification who are experts as well in the search of mass graves, high numbers of disappeared. We've also received help from different prosecutors' office, from the National Guard on forensic identification, and we have interinstitutional agreements, already 6 of them signed, in order to be able to share information. As well, we've been able to strengthen the structure on a national level for finding disappeared people. There was, for example, a center created for identification of disappeared people. On a legislative level, we are the only country that understands that we need to approach this as a state policy for the identification and the location of high elevated numbers of disappeared people, mass disappearances. So now I will give the floor to Yesca Garcia Ramirez. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Yesca Garza from the Center for Human Identification in Coahuila. I would like to talk about what it means to identify high numbers of disappeared, mass disappearances from a forensic perspective, and how to work on this from an institutional level. As there is a lack of traceability when biological remains are gathered, we needed a better methodology with a mass focus that will allow us to work forensically on a large scale in order to be able to do a mass analysis of all of the investigative information that we have. such as using fingerprints, using DNA, create better universes of search so that we can create also better theories as to the disappearance, and working as well in a multidisciplinary fashion with different areas of forensic science, with the ultimate goal that these remains be returned to the family in a dignified way. We have worked on identifying tens of thousands of human remains that have been found in mass graves, in unmarked graves. Institutionalizing forensic search in order to identify these remains means that we have to have centers for the identification of human remains. We have to work in areas where there are specialists working on finding disappeared people. This is something that has been really asked for by so many families of the disappeared, that these remains be identified and that the remains be found. We also have to respect human rights as well as working in a technical fashion. We have to respect these human remains, give them treatment that includes dignity and includes respect, and that also allows us to identify these remains. Good afternoon to everybody. I am Gustavo Quesada Esparza, Director of the Instituto Jalisciense de Ciencias Forenses. As we see on the screen, we started with this focus on mass remains, on mass identification. It's important also to work with specialists, with colleagues that understand the area that you're working on. So we started with training, with workshops, with technical knowledge, but we started really from zero because we needed to create a systemized structure in order to be able to work in this area, review documents. We understood that we had thousands of genetic profiles already within our current institutions, and we had thousands of fingerprint sets of people that had been previously identified. So we had to find a way to share this massive amount of data, these massive amounts of remains. So we have been able, for example, to work with the National Institute of Statistics to look at their database and find hits or better checks that allowed us to be able to match up these remains and this data, also taking better samples, and the increased infrastructure, areas where we can store these remains correctly and have quality forensic information. Also, we were able to match all of the data and continue to respect the remains of all of these disappeared people. We will continue with 2 more minutes, and then we'll be able to turn over the floor for a response. We still have 2 colleagues waiting to speak.
Two minutes to the civil society.
Okay, muchas gracias. Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Jairo Vivas. Yo soy del Mecanismo Extraordinario de Identificación Forense. Hago parte.
Hello. I am Jairo Vivas. I am coordinator of the Special Mechanism for Forensic Identification. Talking about this network, well, we started with this mechanism in 2021. And we started initially as a coordinating group that just wanted to set out the guidelines. What would this special mechanism be in terms of the identification of remains? I would call it a identification project that looks back, looks to the past, because we're going to look back to all of the remains that have been analyzed to date of 2019. That's when we set out this proposal. So we did set out all of these guidelines, as my colleagues have set out. And it should be understood that we work in full cooperation, collaboration with all the prosecutors' offices from each state. We have different agreements that we've signed with prosecutors' office. We have 3 agreements as well, signed with San Luis Potosí, Tamaulipas, and Zacatecas. San Luis Potosí is, I'm sorry? Yes. San Luis Potosí is where we've made the most progress. We've been able to develop this methodology, this working mechanism. And again, we have started working from the backlog that we had accumulated. And we've also worked with different agencies, aid agencies, international agencies, and we're also working with the Population Fund from the UN in Mexico. Over the past few months, we've been able to design some policies, plans, national strategies in terms of the identification of human remains. We're also creating an interinstitutional ecosystem for identification of human remains. And we're able to be part of a structure that clearly sets out these policies and how we're going to work together. The National Institute of Genomic Medicine is also a key element as it offers some very high-level processes in order to genetically identify remains. We have this lab, and it can help us in terms of this forensic identification crisis. We've also we've been able to work with their personnel in order to be able to carry out a mass identification with with the latest technology, basically for these kind of identifications and labs. Now, creating this kind of lab is not easy. It needs the right setup, the right equipment, the right personnel, but we hope to be able to get this going in the short term. This lab for human identification represents a way in which we can contribute to forensic genetics and to the latest advances in forensic identification. Well, I'm not going to read the rest of my presentation that you see on screen, but what we want to make clear is that with this national network for the identification of human remains, all these institutions, this is a state requirement that all of this be sustainable in the short term, middle term, long term, in terms of the focus on the mass identification of human remains. And all of these public servants are going to work on this as a matter of state. That is why we would also like to have a regional hearing to see what all of the different states have done with the focus on missing persons. Thank you very much.
Have to give
4 minutes.
to you, yes, 4 minutes to to the civil society. Could you please go on with your presentation? Thank you.
Good afternoon. From the Movement for Disappeared Persons in Mexico, we send our greetings. The participation of families is a right in general laws and in the agreement of the creation of extraordinary mechanisms for forensic identification. Ever since the hearing in 2019, the state has committed to respect this right, and since December 2021, this is moving backwards by limiting our participation. The processes to certain processes, the spaces for participation have become spaces of information that do not guarantee the voices and opinions of families to be considered, and strategies and other approaches in this agenda. For instance, in January, we were informed of fundamental changes in the structure of the coordinating group, which had 7 elements and now only has 1, without taking us into consideration or telling us. For us, it's important to respect the principles of participation contained in the law. Participation should be broad and effective, remembering that this is a fundamental right and not a concession. The reduction of participation has extended to other processes. The legislature, according to Article 17 on the right to be searched for, attempts to disconnect this from investigation, holding a consultation regarding the general law and in a digital format which is not very accessible. And also currently the National Search and Commission has published a national program in which there was not broad participation in its design. As my colleague mentions, the participation of families is fundamental to strengthen the forensic policy of the Mexican state, but it is also important for institutions to cooperate in order to continue consolidating it and also ensure their technical and political independence and guarantee that it has sufficient budget and a strong structure to fulfill all of its functions. Likewise, moving forward with greater solidarity and the consolidation of centers of human identification at all levels, properly equipped and connected in order to identify bodies and other remains. Also guarantee that in the states that have agreements of collaboration, should be consolidated. Despite the fact that this has been signed, there is no clarity. Members of the teams and strategies for identification being used. MEF should be connected to other forensic institutions. Now it seems that they are competing with each other rather than coordinating, allowing for the strengthening of forensic services to thus avoid these setbacks. It is necessary to establish trust in institutes in charge of forensic investigation in Mexico, and remember that without families, this can't go on. And this council is a collegiate organization made up of the family members of people who have disappeared and organizations selected by the Senate from the National Citizens Council. We announce the opening of this, we cheer on the opening of this hearing. However, this event has not been very broadly broadcast in Mexico. Hundreds of organizations and family members are not. Remember, we exhort for these calls and invitations to have, in the future, to have the maximum publicity to guarantee this right. Regarding forensic setbacks, the indications by the report of organizations, there are 52,000 people who have not been identified, which are in the hands of the prosecutors. There is not an official figure from the Mexican government regarding this, which is very concerning because it requires this official diagnostic tool which the Attorney General's office should present, as well as local prosecutors. We recognize the work and efforts made by the Mexican government in forensic matters, but there is still a great deal of work that must be done, that the Mexican state must commit to create, execute along with families a guiding plan of work for handling the forensic crisis in a clear fashion, showing the concrete role of institutions such as the National Center and other regional centers and organizations and entities, expert services and prosecutors' offices, as well as or extraordinary mechanism for forensics, which was an initiative that was obtained by families. Unfortunately, the MEF currently is not connected in its structure with uncertainty about its functions in the future. What's even more concerning is that a year after it was set into operation, there is not a working plan, which is fundamental for this. We recognize that the database of the Attorney General's office has shown progress. It is being developed and requires more investment of resources to move forward and to connect information and agencies. It is likewise concerning the lack of communication with this system and the database. This connection is of a complementary nature between them, and we need a commitment from the Mexican state to present, at the short run, a path of work for cooperation and connection between the National Commission of Search and the Attorney General's office. One additional point to be connected with the participation of families in these forensic processes. In this sense, we recognize the initiative of MEF in the National Commission of Searches and Forensic Centers. For this initiative, we must hold consultations. Once they have been held, most of the time they are done virtually. This limits participation and does not provide results. Good afternoon. I am representing the Foundation of Justice and committees of family members of migrants from Central America and Mexico, and I will be speaking about migrants in Mexico. We do not have mechanisms of coordination with a transnational and differentiated approach for searching for migrants involving nationally and national institutions and from other countries. We are still implementing the search committee for disappeared migrants and the disappearance, which would be a space of coordination between various government and non-governmental actors in the region. Just to mention one example, regarding the lack of cooperation between countries in the case of the massacre of the 72 migrants, the lack of binational collaboration has made it not possible to exhume and identify 7 bodies buried in Guatemala and Brazil, requested 9 years ago. both the committee as well as against forced disappearances as well as another organization recommended such a forensic investigation, including experts and the forensic team to identify the bodies found between massacres of migrants which took place in the states of Tamaulipas and Nuevo León. This commission has identified close to 100 of the 190 bodies that were provided, but it does not have the resources and sufficient support from all the authorities to fulfill its mandate. The approval of other mechanisms is a great step forward toward institutions that are functioning in this fashion. However, we find the steps backward lamentable with the Attorney General's office for this reason and others. We have presented a complaint which is still being processed. The Attorney General's office did not fulfill its obligations to search for migrants, as well as the disconnection and lack of coordination between prosecutors' offices in order to combat the forensic crisis, which has caused fragmentation and the creation of their own registries by the National Commission of Searches. Crimes against migrants lack an approach of macro criminality. In addition to forced disappearances, there's a lack of capacity of entities of investigation to face illegal human trafficking markets in some cases with apparent connections to state entities. And I would emphasize this, with apparent connections with state entities. And I will end quote. For this reason, we have recommended that a special investigation commission for migrants be created. The Attorney General's office has shown its interest in technical assistance from the UN. However, it's necessary to take specific steps toward its fulfillment. That will be all. I am the mother of Victor Adrian, who was disappeared at the hands of the state along with 6 other people nearly 14 years ago in Coahuila. We are here to express the inefficiency, the institutional inefficiency, and the re-victimization, which you and they know, because we have been involved in this for decades. Just our presence here is proof of that. The laws and new institutions are inserted at the high levels of corruption and impunity. We currently have enormous bureaucratic apparatus which do not permit efficient and effective searches to take place, causing re-victimization and continues with the administrative disappearance. Our relatives are being disappeared all over again. Amidst the institutional inactivity, we must all be coordinating with many institutions who do not coordinate amongst yourselves. The criminalization prevails against people who have been disappeared, but not here. That's what we face there. With the public ministries, the local communities, on all levels. What is true is that you are not finding people. We're the ones doing that work. We, the relatives, we're the ones making progress. However, even if we do find them, that doesn't mean that they'll be coming back home. And when that's the case, the delivery of human remains of cadavers re-victimizes everyone, and it's lacking in dignity. We have not had enough life to turn this around, and I'm not certain if we will have enough life left to do it. Because many of us, we've died in the process of struggling. We've been murdered. We've been disappeared. And you don't go looking for us. You don't protect us. You have let us down. Thank you. I represent the families of Ricardo Lagunes Gasca and Antonio Valencia, environmental defenders and human rights defenders who were disappeared in Mexico on January 15th, 2023. We experienced personally the inefficiency of national and state commissions for searches and investigation entities. Their responsibility was to find them quickly and alive, and they failed. There's no sense to talk about massive identification if the entity is in charge of investigation and search are inoperable to find people who have disappeared and do not have mechanisms for humanitarian recovery. I am asking you, Carla Quintana, directly to give us a report that includes an analysis of context, methodology, properly founded for finding disappeared persons. Without that, we will not have truth or justice. Despite the orders of the Inter-American Commission and the UN for Mexico to increase resources and capacities for locating my brother Ricardo and Professor Antonio with life, you failed. And since they've been missing for 2 months and we still know nothing about where they are. The state. I demand that the state find them and that the President of Mexico receive us. I ask the UN and the Commission to take precautionary measures to demand that the state find humanitarian exits in relation to companies and organized crime and the protection of defenders in risk using the proper legal concepts that are applicable from the UN. Disappearances at the hands of companies and organized crime, that's the same thing as being disappeared by the state.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. We represent the collective love for disappeared people in Tamaulipas, Mexico. We will be speaking about the implementation of the MEF in Mexico, in Tamaulipas. The registry shows this number of people unidentified, but we know that there is a black hole in these figures. The Mexican government is required to eradicate and find a solution to this severe forensic crisis. They are required to search and identify all the people who have died. MEF has now brought hope and new life to many families who are hoping to find our relatives, but this is a project that did not have a proper foundation and a clear objective, lacking coordination and communication between authorities and family members. You can't imagine they didn't imagine the magnitude of the monster they were standing against. So we are calling for the restructuring of MEF and for our rights to be searched for, guaranteeing the identification of unidentified people to access truth and justice. The MEF must not be eliminated, it must be adapted to the particular needs of every region, and there must be an analysis of the conditions of each state to do efficient work and provide the proper consultancy. It must adapt to the economic resources and correctly assigned investments in technology for identification, more highly trained specialists. They must have their own working station, and a collaboration and intervention of relatives. Procedures must be clear and transparent with immediate results. We also see a lack of adequate acting by the authorities, as well as the limitations on search, with findings arguing that there is an increase in unidentified missing persons, overwhelming the capacity of forensic services and their coordination with the prosecutors of Tamaulipas. In Tamaulipas, we have the opportunity to advance and reverse the forensic crisis, all of us working hand in hand. And we have an MEF in Tamaulipas. We have human resources, which are multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary, strengthened with specific agreements and social services for the services of the country, supporting the extraordinary mechanisms. According to the general law, it is believed that search is not over until the remains have been fully identified.
Nothing will be possible without the full participation of all the families, more transparency on behalf of prosecutors, the understanding of the rights that families have to access information and to make progress in terms of identification. Good afternoon. I am Irma Leticia Hidalgo, mother of Roger Ebrard Hidalgo, who was kidnapped and who is still disappeared since January 11 of 2011 in San Nicolás de los Garza, Nueva León. What we are asking for as civil society from the state is as follows. Number one, for them to establish immediately an effective and transparent mechanism for the families and for accountability so that they can influence in the design of the national forensic policy. But this should be with a joint path as to their work. Make the MEIF mandatory in the fiscal processes in all of the states of the Republic, strengthening coordination with development and international cooperation agencies, establishing the adequate protocols, and with the participation of the families at all times. 3, that the Attorney General's Office of the Republic and the National Conference of Justice prosecutors inform on what measures will be adopted to guarantee the collaboration with the MEIF and the new human identification centers. 4, invest in forensic education, invest in advanced technology for the identification of missing persons, not limited to genetic testing, and that way be able to have highly trained specialists. For example, in Nuevo León, we don't have a single one of these specialists. 5, to establish as soon as possible the tools and databases required by the General Act, the General Law, acting with international technical assistance. Number 6, to have the official number of deceased unidentified people and to also count them as missing persons. 7, to have security guarantees and efficient mechanisms for the protection of all of those of us who are searching for our missing in the field, and evaluation and diagnosis of the failures in the existing mechanisms. 8, in relation to the search of the missing migrants, to set up a national council for the search of these migrants so we have a transnational space to exchange information and to coordinate between state and non-state actors between Mexico and other countries. Number 9, to promote the creation of a special commission under the UN for the investigation of massacres and the identification of missing migrants, as well as strengthening the Forensic Commission. 10, to establish mechanisms and safeguards for humanitarian recovery based on the power of interlocutors, use of influence, and the capacity of negotiation that the state has and all the private actors have. Number 11, to establish mechanisms to search for and process information from companies operating in areas at risk for that are risky for human rights defenders. Our petitions to the IACHR are number 1, through technical assistance. Please set up a high-level monitoring mechanism working with the United Nations for the design and implementation of the national forensic policy that we are being told about. Number 2, please carry out on-site visits to Mexico and issue thematic reports on enforced disappearances. And also, please issue recommendations to bring these to a halt. 3rd and lastly, to convene working meetings and public hearings for the families, for the state, for public hearings to discuss disappearances and forensic issues. Thank you.
For your report. I now invite Representative Maldonado to address us for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. I am Guillermo Fernandez Maldonado, and I am in this hearing as the Mexico representative of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. I am here in order to provide information verbally, informally, without being under oath, and this is no waiver of any of the immunities or privileges of the UN in its 1947 convention. In every space, when we speak about any type of search, including forensic search, we need to underscore the basic premise that when we search for a missing person, we should always search based on the assumption that the person is still alive. This has been set out by the UN Committee for the search of disappeared persons. However, we need also to face some very painful realities when someone we know has been killed. Once that heart stops beating, we still have an obligation to respect the dignity of the deceased. So these commissions, and thanks to this commission, which is led by women, today the Mexican government has finally acknowledged that there's a forensic crisis by the report of April 2022. As the families have already stated, this forensic crisis means a second disappearance, which is felt when the state cannot deal with these forensic remains. The state is working on correcting this crisis, this forensic crisis, and is cooperating in a fashion that has never been seen before. With this, they want to acknowledge this never before seen challenge to the government of Mexico. Having created the special mechanism for identification, the special labs, all of the work that is being done on the databases, on the records, this is progress that should be recognized. However, the challenge continues to be there, and it's a huge challenge that can no longer be delayed. It shows that all of the state authorities are firmly committed to moving forward on this, especially the attorney generals. The legislators are also working on this reform to recognize a constitutional right for every citizen to be found, to be searched for. We also understand that all of the rules in this area should guarantee that families be allowed to effectively participate, and that also this should be complied with to the highest standard possible. As I don't have very much time, I'm just going to highlight some of the main priorities that I think should receive immediate attention. First of all, to issue a public policy for the search of the disappeared and for forensic identification that will include all of the competent authorities and will guarantee their effective cooperation in order to clearly set out all of the responsibilities for the agencies and the entities that are involved, and that they be provided with the necessary resources, and that this be used in a transparent fashion and with full accountability. It's urgent to correct this lack of speedy cooperation on part of the prosecutorial offices. Also, based on the general law, we have to apply it. It was passed 5 years ago, but we need to improve the national registry in terms of the program for exhumations, for the identification of unmarked graves, as well as other parts of this new law. Third, we also need to protect the people who are out searching for the disappeared. Last year was a very dangerous year for many of the mothers of the families of the people disappeared. It's a dangerous activity, especially for women. Women not only suffer the pain of having lost their loved ones, but they also find themselves forced to do the search on their own for their loved people, to do the investigation, and they run serious risks and sometimes end up in violent situations. Therefore, we are fully supportive of the press release that was recently published in this area. Also, the Article 24 of the International Convention establishing protections against forced disappearances, and also from the world of academia. We have to strengthen and foster the work of professionals in this area. As the High Commissioner Volker Turk just mentioned less than 2 months ago, this office, as well as all the other specialized mechanisms, wish to continue to help Mexico, especially all of the agencies and all of the families that are working so hard in this area. When we speak of the disappeared, it's clear for us that the main priority has to be for those who may still be found alive. And after that, we will also, of course, have the other important searches in Mexico, including a search for peace, for prevention, for justice, for truth, for memory, for comprehensive reparations, and for a guarantee that this will never happen again. For all of these searches, you can always count on the support of the office that I represent. Thank you very much.
Representatives, it is now the time of the Commission to intervene, and I call on the country rapporteur, my sister Esmeralda, to make her interventions.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta. Muy buenas tardes a todos y todas. Un especial saludo al ilustre Estado mexicano y su amplísima representación, quienes fueron los peticionarios de esta audiencia para colocar precisamente.
Excuse me.
Good afternoon. Apologies for the slight delay. Thank you, and thank you for this incredible representation from Mexico and for providing us with this space so that Mexico may also present before the IACHR, but also thank you to all of you who are representing all of your disappeared and all of the work that you're doing. So now we've heard all of the details of these areas in which progress has been made. But we've also been able to identify some areas in which we actually, as we have just heard from the representatives of civil society who are here with us today, we've also heard when they have spoken, they have really been able to underscore some of the specific areas that need attention. Because, yes, we have made progress, and yes, a lot of the different entities, for example, my own work in the rapporteurship from Mexico, I know that we have been working on this for many years with the help of all of the families of the disappeared, and also with the willingness of the state to provide a response.
In this sense, I would like to specify what, from my point of view, should exist, as one of the representatives of civil society mentioned and asked for, to have a clear path forward with an action plan of what needs to happen, well known, something we've worked on to achieve it, to achieve that progress. And for that to very specifically coincide with what was stated by the representative of the High Commissioner's Office of Human Rights in Mexico, Guillermo Fernandez. Thank you so much for that specific information. And at the top level of importance and necessity, importance, significance, I would put the issue of cooperation with effective connection with necessary coordination to be able to develop everything. Everything involved up to this point in what's considered progress. If there is not institutional connection, it will not work. This institutionality will not work. That's point number one. But what will function? What will they be connecting and coordinating? What are the elements of that cooperation? This is where point number two comes in, which is unavoidable. It's been stated here by parts of the representatives as well. A public policy at a national level. I believe the state mentioned this as well as a necessity for strengthening the responses that were needed. A national public policy that will have this conceptualization of responsibility for that sort of connection and coordination, and strengthening the institutions themselves with resources. This is what creates a public policy. But we're talking about a national public policy that cannot be for just one period, term, or cycle. This is the notion of a state public policy of the Mexican state, with this responsibility to maintain continuity and that responsibility to cooperate, to make these connections. Look, I've learned in these activities and having to learn how to work as a team that maybe the word coordination, maybe institutions don't like that word because it might look like you want to take my job, but here the issue is, this is why I prefer the word connections, institutional connections, on all responsibilities, but those responsibilities need to be seen in a comprehensive fashion with a projection to the future. That this is not about just today or tomorrow. This is about today, tomorrow, and forever. This is the current situation of crisis, but once we've overcome that crisis, to maintain that strategy for these circumstances of disappeared persons. Firstly, that loss that occurs, the mourning that never ends in hoping to find that loved one who has been disappeared. So there is work done, there are methodologies, but the other element, the third element that I want to strengthen is the element of the participation of families. If families do not participate, this won't be achieved, because families are that internal motor, not only in a sentimental, emotional sense, but the need for truth and justice. So having that always on our minds as for the state, the responsibilities implied by this. I remember that list that was presented to us of requests for us to continue working on this coordination as well, on this connection with international entities, that we can provide that support and cooperation at an international level, which has been well stated, represents for Mexico, honestly, a very significant form of support for from the community, the international community. There are many topics that are involved in this responsibility that assumes this special mechanism that is assumed by the mechanism, by the National Commission of Searches, by the National Identification Center, the National Citizens Council. But when we mention 4 entities, but behind them, how many prosecutors' offices, how many federative entities are there? 3. And there are 32. This has to become a mandate, a command that must be followed for everyone, for prosecutors' offices. And here the work of the prosecutor, of the Attorney General's office, will be the strength required to achieve exactly what this represents. The possibilities, I don't want to say to have successes, but to get results. The effectivity in results. My apologies, Chairperson, for going over my time, but this is the opportunity that I have to establish this line of communication, which is so important for both of us. Thank you very much.
But because of the time factor, because you've used up all the time, I can only give 1 minute each to the commissioners here.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. A minute, which I'm sorry to the interpreters, but I'm going to speak even faster than usual. Greetings in general to everyone. I wanted to ask a very specific question to the state. We've talked a lot about coordination between institutes, so in this sense, I also wanted you to explain how are you coordinating with historical clarification with certain mechanisms, because it goes hand in hand. So sometimes this abundance of institutions can create even confusion. In Colombia, it's called the procedurology is what we call it. So for the case of, and just remember that yesterday the Inter-American Commission published the communique regarding women who are searching for missing persons. In addition to recognizing their struggle, we need to establish something. Mothers, relatives, it's great to see you, will go out looking, but in that search they get killed. So then there are extrajudicial killings. In that search they suffer sexual violence. So there is sexual violence and aggression. So there's the disappeared person, and then mothers and relatives searching for them who get threatened, and then new human rights violations are committed. So honestly, Chairperson, I don't want to go too much over, but I don't want to end without mentioning something that Mina taught me while we were talking, and I'm just going to read it. If you come back, in case you come back, I'll leave the door open so you can come in. In case you come back, there's a space waiting for you at the table. In case you come back, I will spend nights sleepless to come and give you a kiss again. You told us this in here. We in Mexico from the Inter-American Commission, we want to tell you again, we will be there with you. In case they come back, they will come back. They will always be in our memory.
Thank you, my brother.
Muchas gracias, Presidente.
Well, thank you, Chairperson. I will use 45 seconds for this. Just 5 points. 1, I see that this is a structural problem. 2, just as was said by the UN representative, I think everything begins with a clear recognition of the rights of the victims in this case, and hopefully this will reach a constitutional level. 3rd, it's very important the design of protocols of agreements according with the highest international standards and technical standards. 4th, there has to be constant monitoring domestically and also from our part on the implementation of these protocols. And 5thly, a point that I'm not clear on, the design of these protocols cannot forget the victims. It must be done in a connected fashion with the participation, because otherwise it's very difficult to successfully implement it. Thank you very much.
The state, and I'm sorry, I could only give 2 minutes each, so your 8 minutes is gone. 2 minutes, please, to close, but please remember that you can make written submissions and send written submissions.
¿Me pueden poner la presentación?
Could you put on the budget and the presentation, please? Very briefly, and everything else is in the presentation. We'll send it in writing. In fact, Our search this hearing was requested specifically in order to show the challenges and the advances in forensic matters in Mexico considering the crisis. We want to present the progress since we were with the Inter-American Commission in 2019 in consideration of budget resources at a federal level. These are the yellow line that you see there is the resources given to the 32 federative entities. Here are the resources given to human identification institutions since 2019. At this date, as was mentioned by the representative of the UN, more than ever before, this political policy has been counted on. That's why we ask the Commission to hold a regional hearing regarding the best practices in this sense addressed to forensic search. And yesterday, in fact, the national program of searching was issued, an open participative process with family members and institutions. The challenge in a country with so many reported missing, such as ours, is the challenge of how to make effective the right to participation of every single one. Equally, it was mentioned that the Citizen Council had family members who would have liked to have come here. It's not always possible to reach everyone. How does this happen? Not just through domestic institutions, but also international ones. The Committee Against Disappearance in the UN in Mexico, there was a participation of less than 100 people at the process of these principles in person. So how do we reach 112,000 families to obtain equal participation? Regarding the MEF, we are here as the Mexican MEIF. We are here as part of this comprehensive policy as the Mexican state. The challenge is enormous. Of course, what we are interested in is strengthening this policy through human resources and material resources. And with the MEIF has this vocation, as its name indicates, it is extraordinary. And answering the question about the mechanism for historical clarification, what was called the Dirty War, the National Searching Commission is a part of the institutions, but before that, we had a unit for searching. It was simply transferred over.
2 minutes.
I'm sorry, the Attorney General's Office of the Nation would like to use the minute that was taken from us.
I'm sorry, I don't know who's speaking because I do not know that I took a minute from. Yes, but I took 6 minutes from both sides. We have to, because we have to end. But if you could speak for only 1 minute, that is okay. But otherwise, I'll have to cut you off, I'm afraid.
Okay, but reiterar.
I would like to repeat again that there is already the implementation, it already exists, the National Bank with forensic data, the databases, the records of those who are deceased and unidentified. And on behalf of the Attorney General, we would also like to state that we have the databases that are already being coordinated with all of the different prosecutors' office from each state in order that they also can contribute to this national database. We also would like to state that we have the protocols in place already in existence, and those establish the methodology. The major and main methodology to identify these remains. And so I would just like to repeat again that we are working with the Attorney General's offices with these databases, as was already previously stated by Mr. Joaquin. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that information. Could you give us all that information in writing, please? I now call civil society, please, for 2 minutes.
Good afternoon. Very briefly, in terms of the participation, what has been mentioned, we believe that it's key that the state guarantee allow us all to participate in terms of the families of the victims. It's necessary that we include all of the families because this participation is actually what has allowed us to make as much progress as we've made. Also, in terms of the information presented by the Attorney General's office, we would like to point out that although the databases, yes, they do exist, and we do have the databases for the fingerprints, we'd like to point out that the access to this information by civil society, we know that from 2006 to 2022, the Attorney General's office has just identified 895 people only. When you understand that we're dealing with 224,000 bodies that have been recorded by the attorney generals throughout the country. So this is a failed strategy in terms of genetic profiles. They only have 70,000, so this implies that there's no real recording and the database is incomplete. Also, states like Guanajuato have indicated that the database that the prosecutors have given them, the attorney generals, does not work. So this also means that not all of the information is really being worked with correctly. Finally, very important to point out that today we still don't have the correct registry for the unidentified deceased in order to have a clear identification of what our real data is. The last numbers that we received are by civil society. These are not official numbers. Very briefly, I'd also like to add that although this special mechanism has been something set up by the families, it has also fallen apart over the last year and a half. And they're also not working on the psychosocial structure for the families as well, something that the government has not really implemented. And finally, we would also like to be able to have more space in the future to continue on this work. I would like everyone who's here, all of the members of the commission, all of the representatives of the state, think of my brother, Ricardo. He is a human rights lawyer. He is the father of Maria Jose, who's 4 years old. He is a peer of yours. He works also fighting against corruption. He works incredibly well defending the legal rights of marginalized communities. He works in the same area that you work in. Think about this. Ricardo is one of you. He's a colleague of yours, and his disappearance impacts everyone. And here I want to express my support to everyone who has had a family member disappeared. I met some of them yesterday. I share their pain. We have suffered 2 months what they have been suffering over decades.
Thank you. I am not going to take up time. There's certainly not 3 minutes for my closing, but there is one thing I noted. I have several questions, but I'm not going to go into any of that except to request of the state to please send us information as to the extent of the participation of all the family members who undertake searches for their disappeared loved ones, and what that extent of that participation is. In our view, it ought to be a legal participation, not an informal one, which depends on the discretion of some official. It ought to be on a legal basis that they participate. And if they have not participated to date on your policies, plans, projections, mechanisms and so on, you have to redo those and make sure that they participate and they share their ideas and plans and their experiences, which is greatly because their experience is on the ground. They've been searching for this. And I do understand about Ricardo, but we do have precautionary measures. We had, and we are cognizant of the fact in relation to every person who's disappeared, because we accept it's the most painful thing that could happen, continuous suffering for your loved ones because you do not know what happened. And I adopt the submissions of Representative Maldonado. I'm not going to repeat any of it. I agree with everything you said. And I thank the state for the work you're doing. I know you are the one that's progressing in this direction. And we wish you luck. and hope that you will continue working avidly in order to succeed to find their loved ones. And thank you for being here, and we appreciate and join you in your pain. We hope to succeed. Please send us information as quickly as possible. Normally we say within 30 days, but if you need more time, ask us for more time. Well, we need the information. Thank you very much. With that, this meeting is at an end. Thank you. Oh.
English test, English test, English testing, English with the jazz music, we're testing the English.
Record.
Everyone, on behalf of the We're just about to start. Good afternoon. I salute the delegation of the illustrious state of Argentina and the distinguished representatives of the alleged victims. I declare this public hearing of the case 13.097, the people of Magdalena prison against Argentina, open. I will now give the floor to Assistant Executive Secretary Jorge Mesa to present some remarks in relation to the instant case.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chairperson. This case has to do with the alleged responsibility of the government state due to the deaths and injuries of people deprived of liberty in Penitentiary Center number 28 in Magdalena. March 14 of 2018, the Inter-American Commission has notified the parties of the resolution 116 and the investigative stage. This hearing has the purpose of delving into the admissibility and the main issues and the admissibility of the case. Thank you very much, Madam President.
To Executive Secretary. The presentation of the parties' arguments can now begin. The petitioners will have 20 minutes to present their arguments. Then the state will have 20 minutes to present its arguments. Subsequently, if the petitioners so desire, you shall have 5 minutes to exercise your right of reply, and the state shall have 5 minutes to exercise its right to a rejoinder if it so wishes. Finally, the Commission will ask questions of the parties. I now give the floor to the petitioners for their presentation of 20 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of the commissioners and to the state delegation as well. We thank the commissioner for having called this merits hearing on the Magdalena prison fire. I am Paula Livatsky of CELS, and I am accompanied by Erica Schmidt-Huber-Peña from CELS as well. And virtually, we have Sofia Caravelos from CIAG. The Magdalena prison fire in the province of Buenos Aires, or the Magdalena massacre as it's known in Argentina, is one of the cruelest events of showing disregard for the life and dignity of persons deprived of their liberty. 33 people died because they were left locked in a cell block that was on fire. The fire and the deaths were the consequences of an iron fist policy that made the prisons of Buenos Aires explode, especially when they were holding detainees without convictions and under inhumane, overcrowded conditions. To deal with the overcrowding, the province opted for accelerated and precarious construction of modules that did not meet the minimum international standards. Since 2005, there have been other fires in prisons and police stations which are also overcrowded, which shows the urgency of this issue. On October 15, 2005, on the eve of Mother's Day, what began as a minor argument between two inmates ended with the death of 33 inmates after they were locked in by order of the shift commander in the middle of a fire in the cell block where they were being held. The guards, instead of intervening to protect the detainees, shot at them and closed the exits. They sealed their death. Meanwhile, outside the unit, there were already mothers lined up for the visits and others who were traveling when the bodies were transferred to the chapel. Only 2 of the 35 managed to survive who were locked up. The context of the provincial penal and penitentiary system must be taken into account in order to understand the conditions that generated and made possible this fatal outcome. In 2001, the government of the province of Buenos Aires declared that there was a security and penitentiary emergency. Criminal policy measures and the judicial response resulted in a critical overcrowding situation. Within this context, the province began to build the so-called low-cost modules, quick construction wards used to expand the capacity of the Buenos Aires penitentiary system. The situation became so critical that in 2005, the Supreme Court of the nation issued a very important ruling in a collective habeas corpus in which it urged the province to reverse the structural situation of human rights violation in the provisional prisons and the police stations and to solve the problem of overcrowding and inhumane conditions of detention that had been verified. It ordered measures from 3 provincial powers. The court held that the construction of jails was not the solution if the provincial incarceration rate continued to rise. Actually, this debate continues to this day. The construction of the low-cost modules in Magdalena, Unit 28, began in 2003, and they were opened in 2005 despite the fact that they were not suitable for housing people. The province continued to house detainees there even before the final construction was completed, despite numerous structural deficiencies. What were these low-cost modules like? Well, Pavilion 6 was a compact reinforced concrete building divided into 2 independent accommodation pavilions with 60 bunk beds. The module occupied an area of 20 by 30 meters. The fire ward 16B had 58 inmates. It was a section for inmates who had good behavior. Each inmate had 4 meters for personal use, which is half the international standards. The 58 inmates shared 3 latrines, 3 showers, a kitchen, and individual areas which were separated by blankets and furnitures. All mattresses were made of polyurethane foam, which is flammable. The cell block only had one main entrance door with a padlock that could not be opened from the inside. It had a padlock emergency exit at the back, blocked by a piece of furniture which the detainees did not even know about. There were 2 barred windows. What was the fire like? On October 15, 2005, the night before Mother's Day, 2 inmates started arguing about the organization of the space that they had where their families were going to visit. This minimal discussion generated a very violent reaction from the prison guards. 15 agents came in to suppress the discussion, some of them with shotguns. The inmates protected themselves with mattresses and sheets. We were able to prove in court that there were at least 21 rubber bullet shots fired. The guards removed and handcuffed 23 inmates who were near the entrance. 35 detainees remained inside, cornered, barricaded in by the repression. In protest, a detainee started a small fire, and the fire, smoke, and toxic gases spread in a matter of minutes. According to 2 experts, it took 5 minutes for the smoke to spread throughout the entire pavilion. What was the response of the correctional officers? Screams and gunshots. They took no action to put out the fire or to protect the detainees. When they could no longer stand the heat and the smoke themselves, they left the cell block. By order of the shift commander, they locked the only exit door from the outside, so 35 people were trapped by that fire in a small room with 2 windows and no exit, no fire extinguisher, no water, no possibility of survival. The detainees ran to the front door, begging for help, but no guard opened the door. Some inmates managed to enter the shower area, looking for water to quench the heat, but to no avail. While this was happening in the burning cell block, the guards preferred to focus on the security of the unit, and just as they locked off cell block 16, they evicted the inmates next to it and handcuffed them. Many testified that while they listened to the desperate screams, the agents did nothing. They begged them to take off their handcuffs so they could go and help the other inmates. Finally, they managed to escape and open the emergency door, breaking it down. They saw that only one person got out. They climbed out the roof, broke the windows and walls to try and rescue the inmates trapped and consumed by the toxic smoke. They used the fire extinguishers, but not to extinguish the fire, but to break down the wall because those extinguishers were empty. The inmates from outside tried to draw water from the fire hydrants that were in the front and in back of the models. To their surprise, no water came out. We proved in court that the electrical panel needed to pressurize the hoses and give pressure to the water was not connected. The fire prevention system was therefore never in operation. The effort of the detainees to save those who were trapped, even risking their own lives, was enormous but futile. It was notorious in the trial that the anguish and suffering is still present in the memory of these people, regardless of the time elapsed. They did not receive any psychological assistance after the fire. They were only given medication to silence their memories. They were able to rescue 2 people, although one of them later died. The other 3 remained locked up and died. It's proven that the agents called the firefighters 25 minutes after the fire started, and that when they arrived, it was already in the self-extinguishing stage. Even so, the firefighters wanted to enter the pavilion, but they could not do so because there were no penitentiaries in the place. They withdrew, citing security reasons. Finally, they were able to enter under protective custody. It had been judicially proven that it was the detainees themselves who helped the firemen to remove the dead inmates already at that time. They found most of the bodies piled up at the entrance by the door. This entire episode lasted 50 minutes, less than the duration of this hearing. 33 inmates died from the toxic fumes and the smoke. Only one guard, who wasn't even in the prison that day working, came to help. The prosecutor's office has charged 17 prison officers, CELs and CIDH, filed as plaintiff, representing the families of 3 deceased persons. The response to the prosecutor's request was the acquittal of the prison officers, with the exception of the 2 chiefs. This decision was appealed only by the relatives of the victims, specifically the same litigants who are here today. On appeal, we succeeded in bringing all of those involved to trial. The court took almost 2 years to set a trial date. Another criminal investigation arose from the same case, which was referred to another prosecutor's office to analyze the responsibilities of the officials who were aware of the shortcomings in the fire prevention network and other irregularities. This case was dismissed without any further action being taken. Some inmates who at the time of trial were still in detention said they were threatened by the prison services to change their statements. An investigation was opened into these threats, but no progress has been made. We were also able to hear the accounts of both civilian and prison firefighters and see how the latter tried to protect the guards. The penitentiary agents even tried to create the idea that the inmates did not want to leave the pavilion or that the screams had not been heard. An investigation was ordered for false testimony, but just like the investigation into the threats to witnesses did not progress. On February 9, 2018, almost 13 years after that sad October the 15th, the Oral Criminal Court number 5 of La Plata decided to sentence the director of the prison, the shift chief, and the responsible for that repressive operation, and a penitentiary agent. For the first time, senior officers of the Buenos Aires Penitentiary Service received sentences for the deaths caused by the fire in the prison. The court acquitted the other 14 prison guards. Beyond that, the sentence allowed to reconstruct what happened and to call attention to the direct consequences of housing inmates in places that are unsafe, which cannot protect their life nor the safety of the people under their custody. On June 22nd, 2021, the Court of Appeals overturned the acquittal against the second head of the external security guard and modified the legal qualification of 2 of those who had been convicted. It confirmed the acquittals that still do not have a definitive sentence. During the oral procedure, much evidence was produced on the irregularities linked to the bidding process, the awarding, execution, and delivery of the work, as well as the acquisition of the equipment, and the knowledge of the prison authorities of all of these deficits, especially in relation to the non-functioning of the fire prevention network and equipment. For this reason, the plaintiffs requested the dismissal of the case that had been initiated a few years earlier. The court was ordered to forward the information produced from the criminal case, but no progress has been made. In short, almost 18 years after the fire, we managed to get 4 high-level officials convicted for the Magdalena massacre while we wait the resolution of the Superior Court for the appeals. However, there's been no progress in the parallel investigations for the threats that the inmates received, false testimony of the prison guards who testified, nor in the criminal and administrative investigations on the irregularities in the construction for these low-cost modules. In the latter case, because of the possible conditions for this cruel event to have happened. For all of these facts, we claim the international responsibility of the Argentine state for the violation of the rights to life and personal integrity established in Article 4 and 5 of the American Convention of Article 7 on personal liberty due to the lack of the presumption of innocence. Since of the 58 detainees in the pavilion, 56 were in pretrial detention and housed with receiving the same treatment as those convicted already, and for the violation of Article 8 and 25 for the lack of a proper investigation within a reasonable period of time. In turn, the state is responsible for the violation of the personal integrity in favor of the family of the inmates who died and those who survived the fire, for the suffering they experienced and for the long and difficult process of justice.
In regard to repairs, the Magdalena massacre is not an isolated event in the prison history of the province of Buenos Aires. Before Magdalena, there was the Almost prison fire, which killed 35 people. In 2017 and 18, there were fires of the police stations in Pergamino and Esteban Echeverria, in which 18 inmates died. In 2016, having even conviction, in a judicial visit, it was found that in Ward 16, there were inmates and that the firefighting network was still not working. It was closed while the rest of the low-cost modules continued to operate. The structural situation of overcrowding and overpopulation has been going on for decades. Nowadays in Buenos Aires, there's a 98% overpopulation. In the last 2 years, there's been a slowdown in the growth of the number of people detained, but the numbers continue to grow, and today it's 52,000 people. This is the highest number ever recorded in the province. In addition, 52% have not been convicted. The automatic use of pretrial detention is widespread in the province. For various reasons, judges issue more pretrial detentions, fewer releases, and grant fewer early releases. With an incarceration rate well above the national rate, the province needs prison rationalization measures and specific devices to solve the endemic overcrowding of the system that leads to cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment and puts at risk the life of integrity of inmates as demonstrated. To start defining this policy, it's crucial to understand the actual capacity of the system. It's not possible nowadays because there isn't a definition of places and quotas defined that would allow us to adequately calculate the level of overcrowding and the number of places needed to eliminate overcrowding. Therefore, we asked the Inter-American Commission to order the state a series of reparation measures related to the prison fire and the structural circumstances that caused the fire to have the consequences it did. In this opportunity, we are only going to highlight a few of them. First of all, we ask for justice. We ask for serious and exhaustive judicial and administrative investigations into the irregularities of the construction and awarding of the works and into the responsibilities of those who, knowing these deficiencies, house the inmates. In the same vein, we ask that investigation into false testimony and threats to inmates be promoted. Secondly, we request that the state implement non-repetition measures, which we group into two main areas: measures to improve the state's capacity to investigate incidents occurring in the context of confinement. In particular, we ask the Public Prosecutor's Office to carry out exhaustive and expeditious investigations about every death, whether it's traumatic or not. So far, that's been extremely deficient. And to put into operation all the specialized prosecutors' offices on institutional violence. We believe that there are areas of representation for victims of institutional violence, so that, for example, surviving inmates can have adequate judicial protection. We also request that the state implement a program of protection and accompaniment of victims and witnesses of events occurring in context of confinement in which the suspected force is in charge of the custody of inmates. The second axis has to do with measurements to determine the capacity of the system and improve detention conditions associated with overcrowding and the use of force. It is important for the province to establish a prison quota under international standards. We ask that it implement a control mechanism on the capacity of the penitentiary system and define strategies to alleviate the existing overpopulation level. We understand that it is necessary to have interpower and civil society representation. This mechanism must monitor the units to ensure that the standards of inhabitability set forth in the quota are respected in accordance with Principle 17 of the Principles and Best Practices of the Protection of Persons Deprived of Liberty in the Americas. We request that the judiciary implement a mechanism for periodic review of precautionary measures in accordance to international standards and promote the modification of legislation or regulation contrary to these standards. In the same sense, the state must adapt the regulations on the authorization of places to detention, bidding process, and approval of work to prevent the use of unsuitable places and to control their application. We ask the state to guarantee that all places of detention have an adequate firefighting system, that the use of polyurethane mattresses will be prohibited, that a protocol of action of the penitentiary and police forces in the face of protest in the context of confinement, and a protocol of action in the face of fire situations be promoted. Both should be accompanied by training. On the other hand, we ask for measures of satisfaction for the families and society. Finally, we ask for compensatory damages for the families who have litigated up to this point. The Magdalena Massacre is one of the most serious episodes of human rights violations committed against persons deprived of their liberty. The construction of a truly democratic society obliges the state to have the security agenda to promote, on the one hand, the strategic prosecution of criminal conduct, but on the other hand, to guarantee the dignity of punishment and that it doesn't turn into cruel revenge and nothing else. Democratic coexistence in an egalitarian state is at stake at how we, the state, and civil society resolve both issues. The Argentine state cannot continue to sustain its system of criminal confinement on the possibility of keeping people detained in undignified conditions and under constant risk of life. The defense of human rights at regional and national level demands that there can be no more overcrowded inmates or inadequate conditions, or with the fear that at any moment there may be the next victims in a fire, or of excessive repression, or lack thereof. Therefore, we believe that this hearing is very important and that the Commission should reaffirm the inter-American standards for the protection of persons deprived of liberty and adopt the requested measures. Thank you very much.
I now invite the illustrious state of Argentina to make their interventions.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. And illustrious Commission, I would like to thank this Commission for this invitation to be participants in this public hearing, which is so important, such a dramatic case as the one just presented to us by Mrs. Varsky. And we want to thank the petitioners for their arguments. Madam President, in the name of and representative of the state of Argentina, I want to greet you and congratulate you for your new nomination and selection as president of the Inter-American Commission. We know it's going to be very successful and really committed to the respect of human rights in this region. And I want to thank the outgoing president, of course, Commissioner Julissa Mantilla, who is the rapporteur for Argentina. I want to congratulate her and highlight their performance in the past. Thank you. Madam President, I would like to present the delegation of the Argentinian state in this hearing. This delegation is a high-level delegation which shows the absolute commitment of the state of Argentina to respond to the seriousness of these issues that happen in the Magdalena proceeding according to the international standards. Present with me for Buenos Aires, Julio Cesar Alac. We also have the Undersecretary of Criminal Policy, Lisandro Pellegrini. And for the national state, the Director of Strategic and National Coordination, Nicolas Moskovsky-Rapetti. My name is Javi Salgado. I direct issues on human rights at the national level, and Dr. Salgado, who is representing the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And now we're going to hear Mr. Moskovsky. Thank you. Good afternoon, commissioners, Madam Chairperson. My name is Nicolas Rapetti. I'm president of the Cabinet of Human Rights, representing this entity. I want to thank you for calling us to the hearing. As you know, the Human Rights Secretary is in charge of expressing all the answers and to all the petitions, and there are many of them. So this type of hearing is really helpful for us. Thank you for that. In that sense, I want to say that this is the third merits hearing called upon by Inter-American Commission, where we address rights of people deprived of their freedom, both in the federal prisons and Buenos Aires specific system. In both previous cases, there was a very detailed analysis of all the available information, and we have actually acknowledged and assigned responsibility as well as reparations, individual and collective reparations. So we're able to advance our agenda of activities. The goal is to to fight against institutional violence in every single form. In the second place, I want to highlight that in the Human Rights Secretariat, we consider this Inter-American system as a very valuable tool for the protection of human rights. So since December of 2019, we have been working arduously to really take advantage of this tool. Our priority is to comply with all the reports, sentences, and agreements, and we of course try to comply with every recommendation in order to provide resolutions and solutions in that area. On the other hand, we also promoted a policy of friendly and settlements and solutions, which had been heard in Argentina. Since our country is part of the Inter-American Commission until 2019, 29 agreements have been signed. In 3 years in office, we have signed 35 agreements of a friendly solution or accomplishing solutions. This shows how important it is to address the issue of human rights, and the fact that this is such a numerous delegation of top-notch authorities really shows that effort. I would like to stress and highlight, Madam Chairperson and Commissioners, because to us this friendly solution agreements is the best way to stop the re-victimization. We come to this hearing to propose this path, and we do it with the highest authorities of this province, because we're working in that way with all cases, all policies regarding human rights, and we involve every area in politics to try to achieve solutions to these problems. Therefore, we're here before you to answer to the situation. We have now the Ministry of Justice and Human Rights, Hiro Larco. Good afternoon, Madam Chairperson of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, commissioners, petitioners. I firstly want to thank your invitation to this such an important hearing. The fire in 2005 at the 16th Pavilion of the Magdalena prison is one of the most serious and biggest tragedies in the penitentiary system in Argentina. That's why I decided to be here present for this hearing. And also, since we started this exercise in January 2019, we have this joint agenda with the petitioners and other human rights organizations, so that this type of tragedies that happened in 2005, 18 years ago, do not happen again in the province of Buenos Aires. Firstly, and for that reason, I want to express to this commission that this regrettable fact has made the province of Buenos Aires to acknowledge responsibility of violation of human rights of those who died and who were injured during this fire in Magdalena in 2005. This position is supported in all the directions by the criminal courts, civil courts, and courts against the state in Buenos Aires. This recognition encompasses the recognition of the value of life and, of course, the value of those 33 individuals who died during the fire, most of them younger than 30 years old, who were just serving a preventative detention. These judicial decisions that I mentioned show that there wasn't enough prevention as pursuant to Section 1 of the Inter-American Commission. These shown by a series of liability judgments. Therefore, the employment of low-cost modules to try to alleviate the overcrowding didn't work. So those modules were not respecting and obeying all the international standards for detainees. At the same time, those modules include certain risks, like the flammable mattresses, and the fact that the fire prevention was not working due to multiple deficiencies in the construction and supervision of this work. Also, along with all the judicial findings, the judicial individuals who were in charge of these custodies were found liable for the risk to the victims and also the omission of the protection mechanisms. They didn't have enough training to face this type of emergencies. On second place, Madam Chairperson and Commissioners, there's an acknowledgement of liability and responsibility, which also addresses the rights of and the judicial protection of these individuals. So the responsibility of the state in this case is based and set in the criminal case coming from so many victims. So, Commissioners, Madam Chairperson, we're here to acknowledge the violation of Sections 4, 5, 8, and 25 of the Inter-American Commission in reference to the Article 1.1 against the 33 people who died after this tragedy and the two persons injured.
For this reason, we propose in this hearing the opening of a dialogue aimed at shaping, together with the petitioning organizations, an agenda for reparations, which will include measures aimed at: first, avoiding housing detainees in buildings that do not meet minimum housing safety requirements, and ensure the availability of firefighting devices in penitentiary establishments. 2, to establish between judicial and executive authorities the minimum guidelines for the investigation of deaths that happen in the context of confinement and the implementation of specialized structures that specifically address the issue and deal with the situation of victims and the witnesses in this type of cases. Third, to implement internal interpower control system with the intervention of civil society organizations to monitor prison overcrowding by establishing prison quotas determined in accordance with international standards. Fourth, to establish unifying criteria as needed that homogenizes the economic reparations made with respect to those that are pending a resolution. As I mentioned at the start, this is a very serious event that took place in our country, and we want to develop plans, projects, procedures that are mainly geared to avoiding this ever happening again. Measures that will impede this from ever happening again. Once we started with our government 3 years ago, we also had the same problem of immense overcrowding in our prison population. We had approximately about 50,600 inmates, which is 320 for every 100,000 in population. In 2005, when the Magdalena tragedy happened, it had increased by 22,300 inmates. So these were additional inmates in the jails, but we had not been able to increase infrastructure by the same proportion. So as a product of that overcrowding, there were hunger strikes, generalized hunger strikes. 100,000 people deprived of their liberty, lacking food, medication, and from 2015 to 2019, 16,000 new inmates entered the jails, and there was only space for 1,000. So in other words, we have another increase in overcrowding. The maximum court in our province described this overcrowding as a catastrophe, a tragedy, and a humanitarian crisis. As well, from this overcrowding, we had high recidivism, which is significantly exceeding the national average. Madam Chairperson, Commissioners, the immediate solution that we started working on was on resolving the structural problems. We set out to carry out a structural transportation through major programs, the major one in the country and in the province, mainly to improve detention conditions and reduce recidivism. So the prison infrastructure plan included the expansion of the system with 60 new prisons and 8 new units. Construction and location has already been in place, creating 12,000 spaces for 12,000 more, taking into account that 24,000 have been built in 200 years of history. We are also following the Mandela rules in terms of the construction of new prisons, and we have worked with municipalities to try to open some of these new holding spaces so we can also place the 4,000 inmates that are held in police stations. We can also place them in the 4,400 inmates, move them from police stations to new prisons. Also, we have constructed 15 new prison hospitals. So we went from 58 inpatient beds to 380 available. We've also been working with the UNDP, with universities on better food to improve the quality of the nutrition for our inmates, and we have also worked on programs to create more work and less recidivism, and we have reduced recidivism by 26%. We work mainly in 6 areas. First of all, to keep the family links alive by working on family reunification in the areas that have most inmates and make it easier for them to see their families during visitation. Also, we have created a never-before-seen plan in the area of prisons. We have been able to document 26,000 inmates. Sometimes we couldn't ascertain the real name of the inmate because they would give different names. So we've been able to confirm identities and also paternity recognition and also marriages for the inmates. We've worked a lot on literacy programs, on education, on all different levels, elementary school, high school, university level, with a very encouraging data that once they're able to access university studies, there is no further crimes committed. Also, we offer the trades. We offer training in professions like textile, wood, and metal industry. So we're offering some training programs within the province. We provide them with modern machinery, with wages, and they create very good quality products. And the 6th element is the post-penitentiary link, which is a rejoining of society with municipalities with social and labor projects. So once we know that they are going to come out of the detention center, we offer them programs so they may find work and they may avoid committing any new crimes. So this is also an improvement of the registries, of the records of where their families live, and we're also able to build jails that are closer to the families and to their communities, and that way they don't lose contact with their families and with their communities. This entire prison transformation described above would not have been possible without the support of all of the correctional officers that work in the Buenos Aires Correctional Services. And finally, as it relates to specific measures in terms of firefighting, first of all, we had to establish a paradigm shift from insurance value to the value of human life. Before, for example, in the case of a fire, inmates would not be allowed to leave the jail. So now the priority is to save lives, because before, when the inmates would start fires in protest, now we're able to let them be released so that they don't asphyxiate. Also create the creation of a chair of the prevention of critical scenarios. This is an academic post. Carmen Palacio de Arias is a judge who is going to be able to instruct prisons and penitentiary centers how to avoid this habit or this custom of starting fires in protest and find other ways to respond. Also, there was the creation of the Firefighting Prevention Department within the correctional centers, the creation of a fire department, and the necessary equipment for same. Fire protection systems, fire extinguishers, self-contained breathing apparatus, structural firefighting equipment, and also fireproof mattresses in all units. So there's no longer a presence of flammable mattresses. They were eradicated within our prison system. Also, there's ongoing training for personnel to deal with critical situations. The course has 2 levels, basic and advanced, and currently 1,496 prison guards are enrolled. Also, permanent training for inmates, both to avoid generating and also to deal with critical scenarios. Integrated drills for firefighters, medical personnel, inmates, evacuation drills as well. And last of all, specific improvements in Unit 28 in Magdalena, the total rebuilding of all of the pods, the prison pods or the pavilions, construction of a new pavilion, total roof replacement, and the installation of a new system of fire prevention and protection. With this historic transformation of our penitentiary system, we will avoid ever repeating a tragedy of this nature. So with this, I would like to invite the Commission to, in loco or in situ, a visit to see in person the objectives that we have achieved. I thank you very much for listening to us and for listening to our plan for renewal and transformation, so this will never happen again. And we hope to see you perhaps maybe next year so that you may see in person how all of this work has been performed. Thank you very much.
For that superb thing. But I will ask the petitioners to exercise their 5 minutes for reply.
Thank you very much. Quite frankly, we recognize the importance of this acknowledgement of liability and responsibility by the state. To us, to CELS and CIDH, it is incredibly important that the state is recognizing this, because it's been many years that we have been asking the Inter-American Commission to come with the petitioners and the state and work along with us to solve the structural problems or the structural violation of human rights that exist in the penitentiary system in Buenos Aires and also in the commissariats of this province. So this recognition of responsibility and the terms expressed in the sense of presenting this as one of the standards of human rights for the state, it's very important. And the importance is to show a starting point to actually refine these measurements, to solve all the structural problems, to provide reparations to the victims, and to build together as a team measures of non-repetition. So to us, this was one of the goals in this case, during the presentation of this case and after the corresponding litigation with Ms. Carabello, who's hearing us in Buenos Aires. We started this from the beginning of the fire. Now, we also expect the written presentation of this recognition by the state so that we can assess the outcome of what has been expressed and to see to what extent they have violated Article 5 in relation to the families and to the detainees who were in the additional pavilions. This is something we mentioned at the beginning of this case, and also in regards to Article 7 and the adequate investigation measures. We also accept this proposal to start a dialogue to discuss reparations, particularly the non-repetition guarantees. And we want to engage in a dialogue, of course, to know in further detail what are the points that the state has presented here, slightly superficially, which I imagine requires additional dialogue and more specific dialogue about how these measures will be implemented in the future, and what's the reach of these measures, and also what instruments are going to record these type of measures, so that we can avoid regression in this subject. We would like to have the Inter-American Commission to join in this dialogue, and the rapporteurship of Argentina could probably do the follow-up of this dialogue that is being proposed. We await the state to call us in the first work group, maybe a meeting to start talking about this, so that we can clearly define a work program with specific goals, and also with the goal in mind to reach as soon as possible an agreement whereby the integral reparations can be actually taking place. That's all at this point, but we want to highlight how important it is that starting in this dialogue, we're going to be able to achieve this integral reparation that we have been asking for many years, which are necessary so that the provincial incarceration stops growing in such a way, disproportionate, uncontrolled way, in comparison with the national media, and that we can actually rationalize the use of prison in Buenos Aires, so that inmates can actually be in prison with the right conditions, and also the appropriate situations. Thank you.
Of the state, if you wish to exercise and use part of your 5 minutes as a rejoinder from what has been said by the petitioners.
Muy bien.
All right. In order to work towards a friendly goal and joint goal, we have 3 points. One of them, to call to a meeting of both parties. That's very useful and necessary, and also to establish the specific plan of work for both parties. Also, to help each other to advance, and we want to invite the Commission to our country so that they can follow up and observe this movement. Those 3 points are probably what would allow us to reach a friendly solution, so that this tragedy in Argentina is solved.
I now invite the country rapporteur, our immediate past president, Julissa Mantiva, to intervene.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. And first of all, greetings to the petitioners, Paula Erika and Sofia, who is in Argentina, and of course, greetings to the illustrious delegation of the state. The Inter-American Commission really values your presence. This is a high-ranking delegation, and that shows how important it is to you. Today is a historical date. The system of petitions and cases, there is usually some fear all the cases go to court. Well, no. The friendly solutions, as you have stated, and as the petitioners have said, and we have been present during other friendly solutions, we understand this is a valid mechanism. So, from the Commission, and as the rapporteur of a country, and I have been meeting with Mr. Salgado repeatedly, and that shows the willingness of Argentina to come to an agreement, and also willing to meet every time it's needed. Mr. Salgado understands that. We have had one meeting after the other, because anything we can do from the Inter-American Commission to recognize the human rights, we're going to continue doing. So in that regard, we value this recognition. We value this starting point. This is a message to this case, a message to the country, to Argentina, and to the entire region, so that it is understood that those people who were deprived of their freedom for a crime don't lose their dignity. They cannot be treated as second-class individuals. So to have the state here recognizing that, acknowledging that, and all the measures to be implemented has high value. I want to thank everybody, and I want to offer my help and the entire Commission to implement all the measures that have been expressed. First of all, I would like to have in writing, if you can submit these proposals in writing, and the work groups and meetings, we're going to have them, yes, as many times as needed, with a specific work plan, and we are willing to participate in all the reparation measures, integral reparation, and also the principle of no repetition, including the family members, and all those adjustments will be followed up by the Commission. And to the Minister of Buenos Aires, thank you very much for being here. I'm really excited because this is evidence that we can continue working as a group, more than just state versus petitioners or anything like that. The human rights are the main goal, the common goal. So it's very valuable that the petitioners talk about the compliance indicators. One of the agreements is always, let's train and transform this, but if we don't have these indicators, it's very hard to verify that. So even though we know about this, I want to say that the Inter-American Commission is always observing these results. So it's some sort of leadership in this observation process. We want to create these compliance indicators. We talk about the sentence, the agreements, the friendly agreements. Those have an impact. Those have an effect. And I want to express my recognition of the Ivana Rosales case, which shows how a case that doesn't reach the court, doesn't have to reach the court to obtain this recovery process and good solutions. Thank you very much for your willingness, your spirit. Dr. Salgado, we'll see you. And thank you, Madam Chairperson.
Much. I'm inviting my colleagues to make their comments, but within very short. Especially my sister Esmeralda.
Bueno, va a ser muy corto.
Well, I will be very brief, Madam Chairperson. All I want to do is to thank everybody for being here at this hearing. I am so pleased to hear the position that the state of Argentina is taking in this case, and also that the petitioners, they are approving of these conditions, of this agreement, as has been indicated, and that as well, our rapporteur, that she is willing to continue on with the follow-up and the support of this resolution. I know that our unit of petitions and cases needed a few of the final details of what this hearing means today. We do have a report that, of course, set out the goal of this hearing, which is a merits hearing. It would be the conclusion. And so it would be up to our specialized unit to see how we're going to structure the beginning of the friendly solution, the entire process, how that will be set in motion.
Invite Second Vice President, Commissioner Clark.
Thank you, President Macaulay, and good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank the petitioners and also the representatives of the state, and this is, I think, a very beneficial outcome here today. Petitioners, you asked for two things. One, for the acknowledgement of the responsibility for the violation of a range of rights, and you also asked for something else I thought I heard, which is that there are investigations are made into those responsible for the unfitness of the prison as well as for the prison management. I recognize and acknowledge the indications of the state to engage in accountability measures, including guarantees of non-repetition and also reparations. But I'm not sure that I heard the response to this second question, and I hope I got it right, which is to continue investigations into those who are responsible for the construction or the inadequate construction and adequate management of the prison. So I just wanted to ask about that, and also to say the offer for an acceptance for dialogue, I think, would be so encouraging for the families of those who died, and it would ease the sense of injustice, though of course not their trauma all of these years later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Clark. I invite my brother Commissioner Strado Rallon to speak as the rapporteur for persons in detention.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. I second all of the remarks that we have heard previously mentioned by our country rapporteur. I'd like to highlight as well the high-level mission and the recognition of those present here at this hearing, and also to underscore, based on that when faced with such a unfortunate event as what we have seen here, what happened here, the Inter-American system, with all of the parties, all of the actors, all of the tools at their disposal, if we're able to finalize the friendly solution within the conditions that have been set out, it would be transformative. It would have an impact that would mean that nothing as terrible as this would be repeated, as what was lived through almost 20 years ago. As the rapporteur for people deprived of liberty and against torture, a lot of the work that has been done in your presentation, we're more than happy to be able to work with our country rapporteur to do a follow-up whenever you feel it would be best, if possible, for us to visit. And we could also that way verify on the ground all of the work that you have already implemented. With this, I would also like to state that there is a crisis for correctional centers within the region. It's important also, therefore, to be able to offer best practices in order to reduce overcrowding, in order to reduce these living conditions that deprive people of their dignity. The Commission was recently in Ecuador, and also as part of some programmed visits will also be visiting some correctional centers in Bolivia, in Honduras. So without a question, within the framework of what we've heard today, what you've already accomplished and what you are still able to do, any specific results is so important for the Commission to highlight and to take note of, to show that yes, we can make things better with a human rights perspective. Thank you very much.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Mi intervención va a ser muy breve. Yo también.
Thank you very much. My participation will be short, but and I want to highlight, of course, the willingness of the state to come to a friendly solution. I applaud this effort. In second place, I want to applaud also the approach to search for the reparation and compensation measures when we talk about the guarantee of non-repetition. I hope the dialogue is meaningful, and that in fact priorities are set, taking into account the point of view of the victims. Now, something similar to what Commissioner Rolón said during his last participation, I would like to propose the following challenge to you. This case, and this is how I interpret one of the statements by the petitioners, this case may have a wonderful catalytic effect. Such effect that will probably drive us to make Argentina become a model for the entire region, not only the province of Buenos Aires, but the country. So again, to become a model for the entire region as to how to create this path, as Commissioner Rosamena mentioned, to minimize the violation, the systematic violations in the penitentiary system. If we can do that, it's at least a step forward. It would be wonderful. I understand that has something to do with the measure of non-repetition, and in second place, it has a structural form. It's not only about building more jails, more prison, or prettier or more beautiful places, but also to establish the penitentiary policies. What kind of conduct has to be reassessed, or maybe stop criminalizing certain conducts that shouldn't be, and see if nowadays every crime merits going to prison, and also to see what are the precise conditions under which the people deprived of their liberty live in those places. So maybe this is a historic opportunity for us to show the entire continent, the American continent, how to do this. That is the challenge I want to face you with.
So I now invite the Adjunct Executive Secretary for Petitions and Cases to make some comments.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. I want to greet the delegation of the illustrious Argentinian state and also the petitioners. Following the instructions that the Madam Chairperson has indicated to me, and before she closes the specific terms, I want to invite the state to submit in writing this recognition of responsibility. And we understand there are some articles that were mentioned by the petitioners, so define if all those violations are defined within the law, and also propose the friendly solution so that if both parties agree, the Commission then can initiate this process, along with the Executive Secretary and the team of friendly solutions, and of course all the commissioners involved in this case. Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson.
I now happily move to close this and make just a few comments. I just wanted to commend the state for the position it has taken in this case. And of course, you heard what the Adjunct Executive Secretary has said in the matter on my behalf, and our behalf, I should say. And I think, as Carlos has mentioned, and I know for a fact, even when I was at the court, this is when a state does this is what is really the best practice that ought to come from states. A situation of integrity, having looked at the facts, and so on and so forth. But I also wish to commend the petitioners for the statement of their case, which was cogent, clear, and precise, and helped us to even more understand the circumstances of what happened. I just wanted to mention one thing, that you mentioned training, proper training for those who work within the prison. And I wanted to suggest, which is an accepted practice, that you also consider training of the judges, who are the ones who send people so frequently to occupy the prisons, and that some of them, in the line of current practice, ought not to be sent to prison, because a first offender who has committed an offense which is not violent, and there is no possibility of violence going to be inflicted on the populace, ought not to be sent to remand, what we call remand in common law, in pre-trial detention. There are too many people in prison while waiting trial. And therefore, states are forced into the situation of building bigger, greater, more secure, and extensive prisons, taking away resources from social actions which the state can take within its own borders. I hold a very particular view about prisons, that it is an exercise which has not really succeeded, and that we all ought to try and rethink what we should put in place of prisons. But for those, there are some people who ought to be in prison, but not the great numbers that are there now. And those who ought to be in prison, we have to ensure that they are kept occupied whilst they're there. And you have said you're going to establish work and training for prisoners, and it should be all of them. Because remember the saying, the devil finds work for idle hands. And certainly in prison, always finding work for those who are idle. And I think it's a very good idea in moving, it's more rehabilitative, and then the occupation will keep their minds focused on the future rather than making problems whilst they're there. I thank you really very much and commend the state in this regard. And we stand ready to assist in any technical manner for you to reach final realization and completion of this matter. Thank you so much. I now declare this case, the hearing of this case, at an end. Thank you.
Ahí cerró, ¿no? Está bien. Está bien.
Record.
I forgot, there's written submissions to us, please, ought to be sent within 30 days, yes, of today.